Hi guys, welcome to the Yellow Jacket Reading Program. My name is Raegan. I am a junior on the track and field team, and when I grow up, I want to be a nurse. So today we're going to be reading Unbeatable Betty by Allison Kimmel. Betty Robinson knew two things for sure. She could run and she needed to catch a train, so she ran. When Betty took her seat on the train, her legs weren't even tired. Across from her, Mr. Charles Price, the science teacher and boys track coach from her high school, stared. "I know a runner when I see one," he said. The next day, Coach Price asked Betty to run in the school hallway. Betty's sprint was just short of the U.S. indoor record. "Could you do that again?" the coach asked. She wasn't even wearing track shoes. He'd never coached a girl before. Girls weren't supposed to run in 1928. But he asked Betty to join the boys' high school track team anyway. Betty had to run with the boys, but soon she'd be running past them. At her first regional competition in Chicago, Betty thought of her hometown Riverdale, Illinois, its clotheslines, its backyards, and the streets she grew up running through. None of them had been like this, but Coach Price had said all that matters is the runner and the track. When the gun sounded to start the race, Betty's legs pumped all the way to the finish line. She came in second to the American women's record holder. Turns out Elizabeth Robinson could run with the best of them. Only 4 months later, Betty was headed to the first Olympics in which women were allowed to run. Betty was only 16 when the boat docked in Amsterdam. She had come to the 1928 Olympics to prove that female bodies weren't too weak for track. On the day of the 100-meter race, the Olympic crowd's cheering vibrated from Betty's head all the way to her toes. Running had made her toenails fall off. As she crouched at the starting line, she noticed Canadian Fanny Rosenfeld. Fanny was one of the world's fastest women, and the champion expected to win gold. Betty remembered Coach Price's advice. She was the runner, and no matter where the track was, it was hers and hers alone. Betty fixed her eyes on the track ahead. She ran until she crossed the finish line at 12.2 seconds. Fanny crossed at 12.3 seconds. In less than 13 seconds, Betty Robinson became the first female ever to win an Olympic gold medal in track and field, beating out the favorite Fanny. Betty watched the American flag rise high above her. She felt goosebumps when she heard the national anthem. And Betty, who everyone called Smiling Betty, cried. Betty cried not because girls are weak, but because she'd proven they were strong. America celebrated its Golden Girl Betty with parades, and Betty celebrated by setting records across the country. When she crossed each finish line, her smile remained. There was nothing this runner, couldn't do. 12 seconds for the 100-meter, 11.20 seconds for the 100-yard, 25.10 seconds for the 220-yard. Yet she was focused on a distant track, the one she planned to meet in the 1932 Olympics in Los Angeles. Betty trained harder. Betty ran faster. She was ready. But she wasn't ready for the toughest competition of her life. On June 28, 1931, Betty went aboard a biplane and strapped on a flying helmet just like Amelia Earhart's. The plane dipped in and out of the clouds that stretched like a track without a finish line. Suddenly, Betty felt a jolt. The motor had stalled. The last thing Betty remembered was the ground rushing toward her. Her left leg was crushed. They thought she was dead until the undertaker discovered Betty was still alive. At the hospital, her parents stayed by her side. They knew Betty was a fighter. 7 weeks later, when Betty awoke from a coma, she could not bend her knee. The doctors had put a silver rod and pins into her crushed leg. Her left leg was now shorter than the other. Pain shot through her like the sound from a starter's pistol. They said she would never walk again. They said, forget running, forget Los Angeles, forget the Olympics. But Betty could not. All she could think of was her and her track. When reporters interviewed her, she said, "Of course I'm going to run again." Betty knew this was simply a different kind of track she faced, and all that had ever mattered had been her and the track. She used a wheelchair for just 4 months. Then Betty stood, then Betty walked, and finally again she ran. It took her 2 years to relearn to stand, walk it, and then run, but Betty was headed back to the Olympics. She learned she could not run as she once had. The pin in her leg meant she could not crouch into the starting position for the 100-meter dash. That had been her race. It had always been just Betty and her 100 meters of track. But if she wanted another gold medal, she would have to run the relay for the United States. She'd take off standing, waiting for a teammate to pass her the baton. Betty wanted gold, so she agreed. She would share her track with fellow Americans Harriet Bland, Annette Rogers, and Helen Stevens. At the 1936 Berlin Olympics, their biggest competitor was the German team. The Germans had a habit of setting records, and now they were favored to win. As everyone predicted, the Germans were soon in the lead. Betty had overcome a train, a plane, and a wheelchair to become an Olympian. She looked down at her leg, its ache constant, and she knew this race was different. But one thing was still the same. It was just Betty and her track. Betty saw Helen reaching for the baton. The fireworks in her leg exploded as she pressed in toward her teammate. She leaned into the headwind. She felt the ground below tremble. Betty let her arms pump, and the limp she could not hide propel her down the track. She passed her baton to Helen, and then suddenly there was a gasp across the stadium. The last German runner dropped her baton as Helen galloped over the finish line. Betty had finally gotten gold again, but this time it had been with her teammates Helen, Harriet, and Annette. When Betty Robinson stood atop the Olympic podium with one leg shorter than the other, she did not cry, and for just a moment she forgot the pain in her leg. Betty stood proudly before the German crowd, applauding America's golden girl, imperfections and all. That's the end. Thank you for listening. I'm now going to draw a few names from these cups to see what classes are going to win some books. So for pre-K, for one, we have Kettering Early Childhood Education Center, Cassie Norman's class. We have Dayton Christian Preschool, Gina Miller's class. We have Delaware Christian School, Casey Johnson's class. And then we have Dayton Christian Preschool, Hannah Wojcik's class. Now we have kindergarten. Okay, we have Tecumseh Elementary, Trisha Dench. We have Crown Preparatory Academy, Sherry Perkins. We have Oakview Elementary School, Anita Peck. And then finally we have Simon Kenton Elementary, Kelly O'Connor. Now for first grade, we have Allen Creek Elementary, Lindsay Kobler. Easton Elementary, Kristen Dinteman. And Perrin Woods Elementary, Brandy Owings. Now second grade, we have Tecumseh Elementary, Bethany Rubio. Mansfield Christian School, Miss Sharda. And finally, Taylor Road Elementary, Mindy Martin. For third grade, we have Oakview Elementary School, Allie Wilcox. Taylor Road Elementary, Melissa Patton. And Calvary Christian Schools, Jennifer Ledley. For fourth grade, we have Risen Christ Lutheran School, Corey Neer. Emmanuel Christian Academy, Macy Miller. And finally, Eastmont Elementary, Jennifer Davis. And then finally, for our fifth grade, we have one, and that is Arrowwood Elementary, Becky Sexton. Thank you for joining and listening. I hope you all have a great rest of your day and keep reading.